The Marine One helicopter descended through the gray September sky, its rotors chopping the damp English air into a furious rhythm that echoed across the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle. On the ground, members of the royal household stood in precisely arranged positions, their breath visible in the morning chill, their eyes fixed on the approaching aircraft. The Bentley carrying King Charles III and Queen Camilla had already been waiting for 12 minutes, and then 20. The king, a man who had spent his entire 76 years studying the Shishao geometries of punctuality and protocol, adjusted his cufflinks and continued to wait without visible complaint. Inside the helicopter, Donald Trump was not looking at his watch. He was not looking at the schedule that had been planned with the military precision the British Crown was famous for. Instead, he was peering through the window at the assembled dignitaries below, assessing the scene like a general surveying a battlefield. Beside him, Melania sat in perfect, impenetrable stillness, her dark hair held in place against the vibration of the descending aircraft. The Secret Service agents surrounding them were already scanning the perimeter, their eyes moving in constant, methodical patterns that had kept this man alive through 2 assassination attempts in the past 14 months. When the wheels finally touched the sodden ground at 12:16 p.m., the President of the United States was 21 minutes late. 21 minutes that had been carved from the King's schedule, and from the carefully choreographed sequence of greetings and carriage rides and anthem performances that had been rehearsed by palace staff for weeks. Yet when the hatch opened and Trump descended onto British soil, his posture betrayed no awareness of any delay. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once apologized for making the world wait for him. Prince William stood at the base of the steps, his wife Catherine positioned slightly behind him in the precise geometry that royal training had instilled since birth. The Prince of Wales extended his hand, and the President of the United States took it, but he did not merely shake it. His hand moved upward, making contact with William's upper arm in a firm, proprietary slap that echoed across the tarmac. And it was the gesture a football coach might use on a promising quarterback, a contractor might use on a foreman. It was not the gesture one typically employed on the future King of England, a man who had been trained since childhood that the only appropriate physical contact with strangers was a brief, measured handshake. Television cameras captured every microsecond. Social media platforms would later erupt with analysis of this single moment, dissecting the angle of Trump's palm, the duration of contact, the slight tightening around William's eyes that might have been surprise or might have been the wind. But in that instant, the prince simply smiled, nodded, and gestured toward the waiting reception. He had been trained to absorb such moments without visible reaction, to prioritize diplomatic harmony over personal offense. Yet what he actually felt, what he might have said to Catherine in the privacy of their car later that evening, was a matter the palace would never confirm. The king waited in the walled garden, a secluded corner of the castle grounds, where he had greeted dozens of world leaders over the years. When Trump finally rounded the corner, Charles performed the remarkable act of beckoning the American president forward, gesturing with his own royal hand that Trump should walk ahead of him, should take the lead, should proceed toward the awaiting honor guard as if he were the host and the monarch his invited guest. It was a gesture of such profound diplomatic generosity that it passed almost unnoticed by those who did not understand what it cost a man who had waited 73 years to become king, and who had spent those decades watching his mother perform this same choreography with infinite grace, who had memorized every rule of this ancient institution and now held the power to bend them. But Donald Trump did not see the gesture as generosity. He saw it as recognition. He walked forward, ahead of the King of England, and did not look back to see if the monarch was following. The guards of the Grenadier Guards stood in perfect, motionless rows, their bearskin caps adding nearly 18 inches to their already imposing height. They had been standing in formation for 47 minutes now, 23 of those minutes beyond their scheduled commitment, their young backs aching beneath the weight of ceremonial wool and leather. They did not move. They did not sweat visibly, though the day was unseasonably warm. And they did not shift their weight from one foot to the other. They had been trained to stand until they collapsed, and they would do so today if required. Lieutenant Colonel Storm Green, the captain of the Guard of Honor, stepped forward to escort the American president through the inspection. His ceremonial sword hung at his side, a blade that had been carried by British officers through Waterloo and the Somme and the deserts of Iraq. Today its edge would not taste blood, but its symbolism was no less potent. This was the weapon of empire, of the 1,000-year monarchy that had outlived revolutions and world wars and the dissolution of its own global dominion. Now it was being presented for the inspection of a man who had built his empire not on land and bloodlines, but on bankruptcies and television ratings and the politics of grievance. Trump moved along the first rank of soldiers with visible fascination. He paused before one young guardsman, studying the brass buttons of his tunic, the precise angle of his weapon. He leaned close enough to see the pulse beating in the young man's throat. The soldier stared straight ahead, his eyes fixed on some distant, invisible point. He did not blink. He did not breathe. He was a statue in human skin, performing the ancient ritual of martial submission that all armies perform for their visiting commanders. Behind him, King Charles maintained a respectful distance. 3 steps. The protocol demanded that the visiting head of state lead the inspection, that the monarch follow as a gesture of hospitality and diplomatic equality. But protocol could not dictate how this arrangement looked through the lens of a television camera. It could not control the visual narrative of an American president striding ahead while the British monarch trailed behind like an afterthought, like a footman, like a man who had spent his entire existence preparing for a role that required him in this moment to walk in another man's shadow. When Trump reached the end of the formation, he turned to Lieutenant Colonel Green with genuine enthusiasm. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you so much." The words were simple, almost boyish in their sincerity. Here, in this moment of military pageantry, the president seemed genuinely moved, genuinely grateful for the spectacle that had been mounted in his honor. He reached out as if to clasp the lieutenant colonel's shoulder, and Green's hand moved instinctively toward his sword. "I'm preparing to raise the blade in the ceremonial salute that would conclude the inspection." "Watch the sword," said the king, and his voice carried just enough humor, just enough warmth to transform a warning into a shared joke. The blade rose, catching the pale September light. Trump stepped back, laughing. For an instant, the tension dissolved. This was not a breach of protocol, not a diplomatic incident, not a sign of disrespect. This was simply 2 men, an American and a Briton, navigating the awkward physical geometry of a ceremony that had been designed for an era when monarchs did not have to share their stage with elected presidents. But the cameras had captured the moment when Trump walked ahead. They had captured the king following. And they had captured the slapping arm and the late arrival and the confident stride of a man who treated Windsor Castle the same way he treated Trump Tower, as a stage upon which he was the only performer who truly mattered. In the royal kitchens beneath St. George's Hall, the chefs of King Charles III were not thinking about protocol or optics or the ancient traditions of the British monarchy. They were thinking about chicken. 160 portions of organic Norfolk chicken, each breast precisely wrapped in thin ribbons of zucchini, each portion awaiting the finishing drizzle of thyme herb gravy that was, at this very moment, reducing on the massive commercial stoves that had fed British royalty since the reign of Queen Victoria. The head chef, a man who had served 3 monarchs across 34 years of royal service, moved through his kitchen with the quiet authority of a conductor leading an orchestra. His domain was a masterpiece of organized chaos, 47 kitchen staff working in synchronized harmony, some attending to the delicate panna cotta starters with their accompanying Parmesan biscuits and pigeon egg salads, others constructing the elaborate vanilla ice cream bombs that would be served with Kent raspberry sorbet and poached plums. The table upstairs had been set with 1,452 pieces of silver cutlery. 5 wine glasses stood at each place setting. The king himself had approved the menu, had written the French descriptions in his own hand, had specified the exact temperature at which the transatlantic whiskey sour cocktail should be served. The Secret Service agents entered without announcement. There were 4 of them, members of the Presidential Protection Division, their dark suits and coiled communication wires marking them as foreigners in this cathedral of British culinary tradition. They did not ask permission. They did not introduce themselves. They simply walked into the kitchen and began opening cabinets, peering into pots, lifting the lids from simmering sauces. The head chef looked up from his gravy. He was not accustomed to having his kitchen searched. He was not accustomed to having his authority questioned within these walls, where his word had been law for longer than many of his younger staff had been alive. He approached the lead agent with measured steps, his kitchen whites immaculate, his hands still smelling of fresh thyme. "May I help you?" he said. It was not a question. The agent explained the procedure with professional calm. All food consumed by the president must be taste-tested. All preparation must be supervised. These were standard security protocols, implemented after the assassination attempts, refined through countless state dinners and diplomatic functions. The agent was not being rude. He was not trying to provoke conflict. He was simply performing his duty, the same duty he had performed in Tokyo and Berlin and Riyadh, the same duty that had kept Donald Trump alive through the bullet that had grazed his ear at a Pennsylvania rally and the shooter who had been apprehended outside his Florida golf course. The head chef explained with equal professional calm that this was Windsor Castle, that the food being prepared was for the table of His Majesty King Charles III, and that the kitchens of the British monarchy did not submit to inspection by foreign security services. That there were protocols for this situation, diplomatic channels, advanced coordination between the palace security team and the Secret Service liaison officers. That none of these protocols involved armed Americans walking unannounced into his kitchen and touching his saucepans. The agent responded that the president would not eat food that had not been secured. The chef responded that the king would not be kept waiting. The agent explained that the security of the president superseded all other considerations. The chef explained that the dignity of the crown was not negotiable. Voices rose. Not shouting, not yet, but the particular elevation of tone that precedes open conflict. And that signals the transition from professional disagreement to personal offense. Other chefs paused in their work, spatulas frozen mid-air, sauce whisks suspended over bubbling reductions. The Secret Service agents behind the lead communicator shifted their weight, their hands moving incrementally closer to the firearms concealed beneath their jackets. It was not a threat. It was the preparation for a threat. The muscle memory of men whose entire professional existence was calibrated to detect and neutralize danger. The lead agent produced a small sample container from his pocket. He approached the nearest pot, the thyme gravy that represented the culmination of 3 hours of careful reduction. He reached for a tasting spoon. The head chef stepped between the agent and the stove. He was 62 years old, and he had never fired a weapon in his life. His hand